Second Floor Sports, a Wednesday morning edition. Matias and Ben Carlton with a very special guest, Ithaca alumni. That's how I'll start this. The Knicks radio play-by-play voice and the TV voice of the New York Liberty, Ithaca College alum of 2005, Ed Cohen. Ed, we really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, guys, you're making me feel a little old here. It's been almost 16 years since that graduation on South Hill, but great to join you too, and thanks for having me.
Hey, we weren't going to bring the number up. We were just going to let the viewers do the math there.
You know, it's been a while, but just remember, it hasn't been that long.
Exactly.
All right?
No, it hasn't been
not that
long.
far away from you.
I will say, I heard someone say, when someone goes in to buy alcohol, all they need to hear is the one in front. Because at this point, people that were born in 2000 can buy alcohol. And that terrified me. So I'm starting to feel that a little bit. And as you know, I'm a Spurs fan. I'm a New York guy, so it's nice to see the Knicks do well or whatever New York team do well. But I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm a Knicks guy. I'm geeking out having you on the show. I can't imagine how Ben is doing, so I'll let him start the questioning.
I mean, so obviously the first and foremost storyline here is we've got fans back at the Garden. Last night, game against the Warriors. What was that like, having your first game with fans at the Garden this season?
You know, Ben, it was surreal in so many ways, emotional on a number of levels. But I think once the game got going last night against Golden State, it was fun and exciting again. And to think it had been 352 days since we heard the roar of the crowd, the cheers, the boos. Julius Randle gives this amazing speech before the game, and you hear chants of MVP throughout the night. And it just felt like normal for at least one night once again. And look, almost 2,000 fans. It's not over 19,000, which is customary with a sellout. But you know what? It was something. And to have Steph Curry in the house, he's arguably the biggest draw on the road in the NBA. To have the Golden State Warriors there, a Knicks team that had a chance with a win, and they didn't get it, but they had a chance with a win to get to 500. I mean, everything aligned. And it was really neat when they ran on the floor for the first time before the tip, and you heard the roar of the crowd, and the people welcoming the Knicks back onto the floor. It was a sign of progress, and it was really great to be a part of last night.
And I mean, I was gonna say, you mentioned Julius Randle's pregame speech, and those are always kind of funny when they send out a player to talk to the fans pregame. They don't always look super prepared or don't really have like remarks written down. But to me, it really looked like Julius Randle was not at all expecting the ovation he got, the MVP chance. And that just seemed like a really awesome moment to be in the Garden for.
No doubt, Ben. And, you know, it's funny. I was taken aback a few times last night. Number one, Randle steps up and gives that terrific speech after being named to the All-Star game. But a guy like Derrick Rose comes in, and he was a Knick 4 years ago, hadn't been back until the trade with Detroit, in which the fans had seen him as a Knick at the Garden. And he gets set to check in, and the place erupts. And then you have Emmanuel Quickley and Obi Toppin. Now, these guys have played close to 30 games as rookies, but they haven't played before the fans. And they received this reception that I think was unique to them and their young careers. So there were a lot of firsts last night, even if it was game number 32. But coming back to Randle, you make a great point. You know, he's somebody who, he chose this, signed a 3-year deal to play for the Knicks. A guy from Texas who played in LA, but those weren't great teams. Played in New Orleans. It's a lot different than LA and New York. He chose, in a lot of ways, the pressure and the microscope of playing for the New York Knicks and being the lead guy. And last year didn't go, I think, as he wanted and as a lot of people intended. And it wasn't easy. You know, there were a lot of struggles, even as he scored a lot of points and put up big numbers. And I think to see what he's done this year and to know that the fans have appreciated what he's been able to do and finally get that response last night on the night you're named an All-Star, it really came full circle for him. He plays hard. He plays a ton of minutes. He hasn't missed a game. He never complains. And as a New Yorker, I mean, you know it, both of you do. that's what you want to see from great
Yeah.
players.
And that actually transitions perfectly into the next question I was going to ask, because it's the first All-Star you have since a player that Ben doesn't like naming too often on this podcast. But I mean, Julius Randle, what this means to the team, we've talked about it before, is that for the Knicks this season, it might not go very well record-wise. It's been a very pleasant surprise so far, but the main thing this season was establishing a culture and getting their young guys going. Besides just having the fans engaged, what does this mean for the Knicks team to have Julius Randle come back and have such a good season and be named an All-Star?
Well, Matias, it's a great point. And, I'm going to correct you from the standpoint of, I think culture has been talked about a lot in recent years with the Knicks. The biggest difference now is it's clear under Tom Thibodeau, you build a culture by winning games. And the expectations weren't, I think, what they are now coming into this year because of how the last few years have gone.
Mm-hmm.
And you're integrating young players, you have some veterans back, but the Knicks have far exceeded expectations. And to have a chance, at least the last couple of weeks, to be at that 500 level, game to game, to basically be competitive every night is huge. They've beaten some really good teams this year. So beyond building a culture, and it's clear that they've done that, they've established a foundation. And a lot of guys are back from last year. And I think the message that we've seen in recent games has been what guys have said afterwards. They love being coached. They appreciate the preparation that Tom Thibodeau and his staff bring every day, practice on game day. And you're starting to really see it come together. Julius Randle is the ultimate example of a guy who, he's still scoring and putting up points and doing some other things. He's become such an improved outside shooter. He's looking to pass the ball when he's trapped. The ball moves. The guys play together. They're still last in scoring. They're number one in the biggest defensive categories in the league. I mean, that's incredible. The top teams are mostly really good defensively. The Knicks are last in scoring, and they've allowed the fewest points. That's an outlier. I can't think of many teams the last 10 years or so that are anywhere near that kind of separation.
I don't know if worst offensive team, but I think back to those early 2000s Pistons that couldn't buy a bucket to save their lives, but you weren't going to score more than 40 points on them.
It's a great recipe for winning games. There's no doubt about it. It's cliche, but hear it all the time. Our best defense is our best offense, and in this particular case, the way you defend is going to keep you on the floor. And that was clear from day one in the summer when they got together.
So you touched on Tom Thibodeau, and admittedly, I was pretty skeptical of his hiring when the Knicks announced that during this offseason. But, the numbers speak for themselves, and, you've got more of an inside view just being the radio voice for the Knicks. What have some of your early impressions of Coach Thibodeau been this season?
Well, number one, Ben, this is somebody who has won games at a very consistent level as an NBA head coach. And you have to remember, he didn't become a head coach overnight. I mean, years on the staffs in Minnesota, later with the Knicks, coming up through college. He is a true savant and student of the game. And you see it in the preparation and how he coaches and how he gets guys ready every single night. I think that alone, just the buy-in and the wherewithal to keep that level of focus has been huge. I'll give you a great example. I mean, you look at the first two games of the year, Knicks have a tough second half in Indiana, and then they come home opener. At least it feels like the home opener, because I feel like now it's a new season with the fans. But they open against Philly, and that was a tough night. It's the beginning of a back-to-back. You've got Milwaukee coming in the next night, and the Bucks at that point had just won handily against Golden State on Christmas, had a day to get ready. Knicks have less than 24 hours, and they turn around and play one of their best games of the year. Payton goes off, and they win by 20 and score 130 points against Milwaukee. Now, you do that on the second of a back-to-back after a stinging loss the night before. That really told me, hey, these guys are going to be competitive. There's a real resolve with this group. I think that was a great example that they've kept, that, this team might not have the talent that they'll eventually get to in a couple of years, roster wise, but they're going to be in every single game. And I think that has held true for the most part in the 2 months since.
Well, it's funny you bring that game up too, because I remember it was, the day after Christmas. It's kind of a lull in terms of basketball. And I remember no one was really watching that game. And all of a sudden I started seeing, I wasn't watching the game. I started seeing my whole timeline on Twitter saying, like, did the Knicks just beat the Bucks by 30? And that was kind of the moment that I remember early in the season, that it was like, okay, so maybe this is a different Knicks roster. You talked about culture before. It's not like the Knicks didn't have culture before. It just maybe wasn't known as the best in the league. I want to ask you something specifically about your experiences broadcasting this season, because as I can imagine, broadcasting with 19,000 fans is a little different than 2,000 or with 0 fans. What have been some of the biggest challenges for you in getting used to this season and adjusting to these weird times?
No, Matias, it is noticeably different. I think we walk away each night, Brendan Brown and I, who's my partner on the radio, and we walk away, we're grateful every time the Knicks finish another game. And I say that because who knew where we'd be October, November? Season starts just before Christmas, and boom, Knicks have not had any real outbreak with the coronavirus. They've had one game postponed. That was just this past weekend with San Antonio. They've been really lucky, and we've been lucky too, just to be at the Garden for home games. It's different on the road. They're playing somewhere else, and we're in a studio in New York City. But it's the way it is right now, and there's a global pandemic. Safety is paramount. But with that said, I think you appreciate the fans every single night when they're not in the building and the place isn't sold out, because even on the radio, the crowd, the fans, they're as much a part of that sound and the story as the game you're describing. And we started to feel it last night, fourth quarter. The Oregon's going, chance of defense. They're getting stops against Golden State. And it was just really exciting to have them back. But you manage the challenges, and it is what it is. I think if there's somebody listening at home, they want the same level of energy and description. The story remains the same. There's just a little caveat that things aren't exactly normal right now, but they'll get there one day. And we're just grateful every single night that we're on the air, team's healthy, and that the games continue.
Mm-hmm. I could sit here and talk Knicks all day long, but believe it or not, the NBA doesn't quite revolve around the Knicks just yet. There's been a lot made this season about whether or not the NBA should even be having their All-Star game. LeBron James has come out and talked about it. De'Aaron Fox had some really interesting comments about playing the All-Star game, especially as a player. He didn't end up making the roster, but as a guy who's kind of on that bubble. Ed, just what are some of your overall thoughts on how the NBA has handled the whole All-Star game situation this year?
Ben, there's no script for this, and I think the NBA, like every sports league, has seen that. If you look at even last year, I mean, for a lot of people, March 11th happens and the season's suspended. I think for many, you're thinking, okay, is this a few weeks? Is it a few months? But at some point, they'll get back, maybe pick it up with the playoffs. And little did we know how much this virus was going to spread and how dire and tragic it would be. Where the NBA pulls together, and the communication last summer between the players and owners was just unbelievable. The formation of the bubble, the amount of money they spent, but the success of crowning a champion. It was remarkable that night in October to think no positives in the bubble, and the Lakers won the title. And I think it was a very quick turnaround. But again, both sides pulled together and said, hey, it might be a tight off season, but we need to get this season started and get it back on track. The All-Star game, I think there's been some opposition from the players, but there's been enough of a unified decision to say, okay, it's one weekend where maybe we could make up some games. Maybe it's a time for guys to catch a breather. But this is best for our business. And I think you're seeing that with what's to happen. And it is exciting. I mean, look at the Knicks last night. It's exciting for a lot of players to know, even in 2 months, in a unique and challenging season, that they're named All-Stars. And I think in that regard, you'll love to see that it's business as usual.
Yeah, I will say it's, Ben mentioned De'Aaron Fox, his comments saying, I think there was some explicits in there saying it was stupid, and then saying, if I get selected, I'll obviously play. So it goes hand in hand. The reserves being announced last night, on that list, were there any players that you felt should have made it and didn't? And why is the correct answer here DeMar DeRozan? I'll ask as
well. He's had a great year, and it's hard when you only have 12 spots. And it's been, for the most part, a smaller sample size than what we're accustomed to when the All-Star voting usually wraps up. You have about 3 months normally. Here it's 2.5. Yeah. We'll see what happens. Look, an injury, something comes up, there's always a need for replacement. But yeah, I know you're Spurs fan in there, Matias. DeRozan certainly has had a wonderful year, and the Spurs have been one of the big surprises in the NBA, trying to get back to the playoffs. I think Devin Booker, Phoenix has gotten off to such a great start. Look, Chris Paul's in, Devin Booker's not. And the Jazz have 2 guys. The Clippers have 2 guys. The Lakers have 2 guys. It's not easy finding a spot for everybody who's deserving. In the East, I think if you asked me a couple of weeks ago, Domantas Sabonis probably a shoo-in. But look what Julius Randle did the last couple of weeks in that 44-point game in Atlanta. He made that final push, and he rose to the occasion just before the voting ended. Zach LaVine's an all-star and says a lot about not just his ability to score, but how he's evolved now under Billy Donovan. So everybody has a gripe, and it's like anything. The minute you cap it, there's always going to be somebody who's unhappy. But these are careers. They're going to get their chance. The guys who've never made it, and the guys who have and didn't get in this year, their time will come again.
I think it was Jalen Rose who said this on Twitter last night, or maybe the night before. He was just talking about, if you're going to sit there and complain and moan and like bang the table for one guy who didn't make the All-Star team, then you got to say who you think they should replace. And I feel like we're all just fortunate as basketball fans that we have practically, we could create a whole third All-Star team of guys who didn't make it this year. And it's a really impressive time for talent in the NBA. It just makes it fun to watch night in and night out.
Oh, the All-Star game is the best. And in a lot of ways, the selection process makes it fun. But I guarantee if we spoke in 20 years, none of us would remember who got snubbed in 2021. If somebody's injured, say Devin Booker as an example, gets a spot if he replaces Anthony Davis. We're not going to sit there and say, oh, that was the year where Booker wasn't initially selected. You're going to say, hey, Devin Booker, all-star. And ultimately, I think these types of things have ways of working themselves out historically in the long run. Once you're an all-star, no one's ever going to take that away from you.
Yeah.
I wish, and I will say, I'm going to remember 2021, the year DeMar DeRozan was snubbed. I will say someone that I didn't think was going to make it, but I really hope does, is Mike Conley.
I knew you were going there.
It's someone that, as a Spurs fan, we've had to play against when he was with those Memphis teams that gave us so many issues, that beat us in that first round, that huge upset a couple of years ago. He's just such a likable player. And it's interesting that you say in 20 years, no one's going to remember who made the roster, because for someone like Mike Conley, at this point, he's probably the best player to have never made an all-star game. But just that one all-star game, if he can make it, that would mean so much to him. And he's had interviews the last couple of weeks, and you can just tell it doesn't mean the same to the players that it does to everyone else.
Without a doubt. And there's no question he is deserving. And he's been deserving in a number of years. The hope is, hey, one day he gets that selection, because it would mean so much to have even all-star for 1 year on his resume. Yeah. But it's been fun watching him in particular because of what the Jazz have done. And you think about him and Gasol in Memphis, great tandem, but Gasol wasn't that guy in the pick and roll who got to the rim like Rudy Gobert does. You know, what made Gasol great and still does is he could pop out and shoot threes. That's not Gobert, but it's really helped Conley right now. And I think you're seeing almost a rebirth at his age in what Conley can do and how dangerous he can be with a guy like Rudy Gobert. And listen, will it be the Jazz or the Clippers or the Lakers in the finals? Somebody else, who knows? But what Utah has done has been just remarkable. I mean, the Knicks beat them January 6th, and they've lost twice since then. And one game was against Denver. They made 23s, and they still lost.
Yeah.
Puts in perspective how well they're playing.
Yeah. All right, Ed. It's time to get to the nitty-gritty now of this interview. Let's talk some Ithaca. Before we get into some sillier stuff, what is your favorite moment broadcasting for Ithaca, or your favorite sports moment, your favorite sports player that you've gotten to cover at Ithaca? Because right now in the Zoom there are 3 guys that called football on the Bomber Radio Network.
Yeah,
the Bomber Sports Network. That would have been embarrassing. So, what was your favorite moment?
I'm really honored, guys. I mean, you could have chosen Jim Mullins or Mike Welch or Dan Raymond or George Valicente for this interview. So I really appreciate you having me. Those are some great coaches in the last 20 or 30 years up on South Hill. But for me, and I know you guys can appreciate this, and I don't know if you had the same exact experience, but I called the Cortica Jug my junior year on WICB. And I was in the stands at MetLife Stadium a couple of years ago when they brought the game down to New Jersey, and just brought back these great memories. There were so many at the Park School, at ICB, at 106 VIC, on the television station ICTV. But I think when you think Ithaca and those big, great moments, you come back to the Cortica Jug, and that was our game. You know, that was our one day a year for the biggest little game in America. And Cortland won the game that I called on a Ryan DeCamp field goal. So this was 2003. It was a close game throughout, a couple of missed opportunities, but the place was packed. The Cortland fans stormed the field. You never forget that. So even in defeat, and I can say this now safely because Ithaca's won the last few meetings, even in defeat, being part of that broadcast was really, really special.
Yeah. Matias and I have been fortunate enough. We've been very fortunate to cover 3 different Cortica Jug games for WICB, and thankfully the Bombers are 3-0 there. Halftime our sophomore year, and then play-by-play in color the next 2 years. So we've been.
It's no coincidence, I don't think.
Oh, definitely
3-0.
not. 3-0 in the 3 games we've gotten to cover. Yeah.
0-1.
Oof. Okay. That's tough.
I never got a second chance.
But so I don't know, when was the last time you were up in the Ithaca area?
I think my last time up there was 2013.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a number of years, but you know, it's such a beautiful place to visit, and I think you guys probably can relate to this. When I was a student, I spent so much time broadcasting games and in the Park School. I didn't really experience much beyond campus. I mean, I did, but I didn't. You know, I think when you come back having graduated, you start to appreciate the scenery, the beauty, some of the neighboring towns, all of that. So for me, I think you get the full experience of the area when you come back a little older than when you're on campus and you're in class and you're studying and all of that. But it is always great to visit. It's nice to still have some professors who were there when I was a student and who are still there. Notably, guys like Me Loop and Pete Johans. Mm-hmm. I know Dr. Starowski's back. I'm sure a couple of others, but you know, those for me, the people who are still there and again, it's been a while since I've been back, but anytime you can interact with those who made a difference in your life when you were coming of age and are still around in those roles, that for me makes it fun whenever I come back.
A few questions left. We don't want to keep you for too long. You're a busy guy. This will extend to Ithaca, the Knicks, the Cosmos, weightlifting, Paralympics, everything that you've covered, Manhattan College, everything you've covered in your career. What has been your favorite sports moment that you've called, and what has been your favorite player that you've consistently covered?
First off, great preparation for knowing my life story better than I do. Kudos to you, Matias. Wow. Well, you did sum it up in the sense that, and I think this is the case for any young broadcaster. Versatility is so important. And, at the same time, I've always, and still to this day, remain so excited for any event I've covered. There's just something about documenting somebody's story that is always special. It can be the Knicks. It could be weightlifting at the Olympics. I covered that in 2016 for the Rio Games for NBC. Whatever it is, there's just something so cool, any sport, about bringing that to an audience that cares deeply. And you have to channel that passion. And it's a responsibility, but it's something that I take great pride in. I'll never forget my first Knicks game, if I'm to kind of pinpoint a moment, which was surreal and will never leave you. And it was in Oklahoma City. It was October of 2017. Knicks had just traded Carmelo Anthony. And then within 3 weeks, they're going to face him in Oklahoma City. And I just remember this is my first game in the NBA, and walking the halls with Brendan Brown. I think I circled the bowels of Chesapeake Energy Arena 3 or 4 times, nervous, ready, nervous, excited, and then finally good to go. And you never forget that moment where, boom, mic's on, and it's you, and I graduated Ithaca 12 years earlier, and you just remember the people, the friends, family, mentors who helped you along the way and helped you get to that point. So that's probably a moment, if I'm to be sentimental, that certainly I'll never forget. And to piggyback off of that, you mentioned the Knicks, but the Cosmos and a couple of others. When you cover a team and you're the voice of a program or a franchise, there's nothing better, because you're in it every day and you're telling the story to people who care deeply about that team. Knicks fans are the best in the NBA, some of the best in sports. And to be able to document what this team has done every single night, that's special. That's what we all dreamed of doing. And that's what makes it really fun.
Just to wrap things up with you here, Ed, the question that's on everybody's mind, I know it's something that Matias and I think about a lot. How does it feel to have your own Wikipedia page?
Geez, I'd have to look it up and see what's on there. I know people can edit and add things.
It's nothing too bad, I promise. We looked it over.
Ben, I sleep incredibly well every single night in knowing that there's a Wikipedia entry for myself. So I appreciate you asking, because now I'll sleep even better tonight.
Glad I could help.
All right, Ed, I know we know you have a lot to get to, so we'll let you go. We really appreciate you coming on. Ed Cohen, of course, voice of the New York Knicks on the radio and the Liberty on TV, Cosmos guy, powerlifting guy, Paralympics guy. He's done everything. Ed, we really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Geez, Matias, I feel like I have to get back in the gym now. I'm worried. It's not been easy during the pandemic. Thank you, guys. You do a great job. It's nice to know and see a couple of Ithaca alums who are putting in the work that you guys are. Keep up the great work, and hope we'll talk soon.
Really
Thanks, Ed.
appreciate it.